let's talk about CRUD operations. What that means. So today's workshop is going to be a bit special because we'd like to talk about high-level coding. So don't expect me to write many lines of code, not at least for this short introduction, but I'd like to give you an overview to how the communication between the front end and the back end is. Let me show you an example. This is CodeFlix, pretty similar to what you are building, right? That may sound familiar to you. So we got a list of TV shows. Whenever we click in one of the shows, then we get the details, right? But today I'd like to talk about the integration between the front end and the back end. I'd like to talk a bit about the database as well. So you may have noticed, if you are working on the back end, I'm pretty sure everyone has been working on the back end already, that at some point you are creating that sort of structures, right? App.get, then you get an endpoint, and then you decide what to do whenever the user hits that endpoint. From the browser point of view, I'm sure you've noticed that on the network tab, let me refresh the page, at some point you got the endpoint here, so you can see. You cannot see my screen. Are you on YouTube, Abdul? So yes, please go to youtube.com/codery/live. Thank you. So as you can see on my screen, this is the endpoint I'm hitting, REST shows, and we can even get the response from the backend. So we got an array with some TV shows, with ID, synopsis, whatever, yeah? Are we all aligned with that? We all understand pretty much that view, right? So back to my backend, app.get. What get means? Updated, wrong. Read, I like it. I like it. I like it. When we talk about CRUD, in reality, we're talking about 4 different words. Can you tell me what the C stands for? Create, correct. And R? What? Read, not rebase. Read, correct. And U? Correct. And D? Delete, correct. There are others. There are other sort of operations, but probably these are the most famous ones. So this is the classic interaction journey between the front end and the back end, and also between the back end and the database. Whenever we have 2 stakeholders, front end and back end, or back end and database, imagine that we have a list of TV shows. What's the first thing we do? We create them, right? That's the first section. We create content. Once we create content, we get it, right? So read. That's what we call the get action. If you notice on the web browser, look, request method get. That's the protocol. Then once we read the content, we can edit. This is what Richard has been doing recently, right? We can update our list of TV shows. And finally, we can get rid of them. That's the life cycle of the data. Okay, so we know that one, get. When we perform a get operation, the message we are sending is, I want to fetch data. But imagine that we want to add a new TV show. That's create. But in reality, what's a technical way to create stuff? Put post. It is post, that's correct. Post. What that means? If at some point in your code you got something like that, app.post, you see, the message you are sending is, hey, I want to add a new show. This is just semantics, because at the end of the day, in here, I can do whatever I want, right? Delete the entire database. So that implies nothing, but obviously that will be awkward. So if you declare a new endpoint called REST shows, the message you send to your colleagues is, if you want to add a new TV show, you should invoke that as a post. So in here, what action should we perform on the database? Insert, correct. Insert new show into the database. Does it make sense? All right, so we know how to create new TV shows. We know once they are created how to fetch them, how to read them. And now, what if we want to update them? What if we want to edit any of the TV shows, the title, the synopsis, whatever? What's a technical action we can perform? Put. Interesting. Can you think about any other? Have you ever heard about something called patch? So these two actions can edit your content. In other words, in here we can have another endpoint called app.put REST shows, and we can also have app.patch. Before explaining the differences between put and patch, because they are very similar, first of all, look what happened with post. With the post, we essentially can send the details of our TV show. With get, we can fetch the details, right? So that endpoint will return an array with all the TV shows. But then look at what I have at the bottom. Let me put these two endpoints together because they are related. Can you tell me the difference between line number 9 and line number 16?
16 only getting one show.
That's correct, Iwan. On line number 16, we are saying, look at the readability. Give me, I want to read, I want to get the details of a individual TV show. Why we did that? In reality, we may get all the TV shows. Actually, you are doing that as part of task number 2019, 2021. You get a list of TV shows, and eventually, in the front end, you find the TV show with the appropriate ID. So what's the advantage of declaring the endpoint on number 16? Let's have a look to the web browser to see if that gives you a hint. Look, when I refresh the page, I got my list of TV shows. When I click on any of the TV shows, look at what I got. You see, REST, shows, and then the name of the show, Breaking Bad. But looking on the right-hand side, can anyone tell me the advantage of using the second endpoint compared to the first one? Correct, correct. Look, I got 6 TV shows, and I needed 2 kilobytes to transfer the data corresponding to my 6 TV shows. However, However, if I'm only interested on that particular one, I needed 600 bytes. Bandwidth. If you are using our system with your smartphone, you have a data plan. We don't want to ruin your data plan. It's also about performance. Downloading 600 bytes of data will be much quicker than 2 kilobytes. In this particular case, we only have 6 TV shows. But imagine you are creating a serious application with 2,000 TV shows. I'm sure you can feel the difference, right? Downloading 2,000 TV shows may take 1 meg of data. Downloading a single TV show less than a kilobyte. So it's about, first of all, performance. Yeah? The page will render quicker if I had to download a single TV show. And also about efficiency, to save data.
This is part of update.
No. This is part of read, get. Yeah, we'll talk about update in a minute. This is only to read content, E1, as you can see. App.get and app.get. Yeah, but look at this column ID, because everyone has been already working on task number 8. If you remember, in the front end, routing is similar. You remember routing? That's the same idea, right? That means a user may want to get REST shows and then wildcard. We don't know the ID of the show, but based on that ID, we'll go to the database and we'll query. It goes beyond the scope of this session to explain what's going on here. I like to focus just on the declaration of the endpoint, that versus that. So about posting, creating, does it make sense to do that? To me, it depends. Yeah, but the thing is, that, I agree on that. But when we create a TV show, if you're a user maintaining a IMDb database, so generally speaking, what details about the TV show you may introduce? The title, director, year, synopsis. But what about the ID? In reality, you as a management user, you don't know the ID of the content, generally speaking. The ID could be a random string of characters and numbers. So it's not up to you as a business person to know the ID of a TV show. That should be calculated by the system, because every ID should be unique. In other words, every time we create a TV show using post, I believe that should be the way we create it. REST shows. And then the system will determine the ID. What about put? Does it make sense to do that here?
Yeah, you want to read a specific element.
Correct, Anais is right. Using put, we are editing an existing element. That means the ID has been already created. Not sure if you've noticed, but when you go to Codery, when you click anywhere, if you select any of the players, there is, probably it's hard to see, but there is an ID that identifies that person, right? In other words, we already have an ID, and based on that, look at the way we read that. Please, I want to update a TV show with that ID. And the same thing applies to patch. It's literally the same thing. So, what's the difference between put and patch? It's subtle, but very important in the long term. And actually, as part of Codery, in the past, we had some issues because not being able to select the right one. So put is probably the easiest one. So what put means is, I got an object, first name, Peter, last name. It overwrites everything. Oh, wait a minute. Imagine that we have that, right? This is our user. And now in the front end, we want to edit user details. So, because now this guy is 35, so we want to update that information, if that makes any sense, right? So using put, we are replacing the entire object end to end. That means if we, for instance, forget to pass the last name, that attribute will be deleted from the database. So we're simply replacing an object with a new object, an array with a new array. Yeah? We replace A with B completely, end to end. Can anyone see any problem with this approach?
Yeah, because if it was your phone number, and you forgot to put your phone number, you won't have that information.
Yeah.
I think with patch, you only edit that bit of information that you
Correct.
touched on.
Ewon, yep. Ewon is completely right. Ewon is completely right. Put is very aggressive because you have to remember to update every single property, and also it's not efficient. Imagine, and this is a real scenario, that we want to update your profile, and as part of your profile, you got things like your CV or your picture, your avatar. Do we need to send, if I just want to change how old you are, which is a number, do I need to send all the information to the backend all the time? That doesn't really make sense, right? Because your profile may be very heavy. You may have many details. So first of all, we may forget to update properties, as Iwan said, and apart from that, it's not efficient. However, with patch, which is way more clever, we do something like that. Again, I don't want to go into the details of the syntax. I just want to give you an overview about the differences. With patch, we do something like that. We say, hey, I want to update that user ID, but I only want to set the age to, well, 35, right? To make it consistent with that example. I have no idea about what else that person has on the database. If he has any last name, leave it as it was, right? If he has any avatar, just leave it. So this is way more performant and efficient, because we don't shadow, we don't replace the entire data model, only the property or properties, because that could be an array, right? So we may want to modify more than one property at the same time, that's fine, but in reality, we don't want to change the entire object. Does it make sense? Yeah? It's not complicated, right, as you can see, but it's very important to understand the differences between these two. In the long term, well, let me rephrase that. When I started to create the APIs for Codery, because I wasn't that familiar with patch, the majority of my edit endpoints were put, and that has caused problems. 6 months later, one of the players has a very big avatar, 1 meg, big picture in 4K in the beach with sunglasses, whatever. Yeah, and then you realize that that person is unable to update the profile, or when he's joining a challenge, the score doesn't go through. Like, what's going on? Why the score is not reflected? And then it's not obvious, but after some debugging, you realize that by updating the score of that person, we are trying to update 2 megs of information. And there are some timeouts and things like that, right? So the backend may give up if it takes a while to update the details. That's why now, whenever I have to create a new edit endpoint, I always tend to use patch because I find it's way more elegant. Also, think about concurrency. What happened if we got me and Ray trying to edit a nice profile at the same time? Right? So I change something, Ray change something. We may delete other things, right? So new user, this is me, and then 1 second later, Gray. So I said age 35. Let me show you that. And then Gray said, no, age was 34, but name was Anthony. You see the problem, right? In here, I will be updating the age, but 1 second later, Gray will revert my change because we are replacing the entire object. Using patch is more elegant because model Ricardo will be age 35, model Gray will be first name Anthony. You can see that patch works much better with concurrency. You know in which real scenario at Codery we have big concurrency issues in the past? Do you know what happened when you run out of time in a coding challenge?
Several requests get sent by all the users at a time.
Correct. If you finish the challenge 20 minutes before timeout, that's fine, probably. But what happened tonight, we got 80 people or 60, I don't know, and half of them, they ran out of time. That happened, right? You were, oh, 1 minute, timeout. So we got 30 people trying to submit the data in the same second. Using puts, as it happened in the past, they may overwrite each other. Using patch, hopefully, fingers crossed, should be able to handle concurrency much better. Real scenario. Cool. Any question about put and patch? No? To me, these two are the most controversial and complicated. Yep.
Eventually, you decided to use objects for this example, but is it just limited to objects? So you see on the patch, you've got a set, and then you've got an object inside of that where it's the first name of Anthony. Is that just limited to two objects? Or
No. You can update as many properties as you want. So here, I mean, again, ignore the syntax. This is pseudocode. But you can do things like that. You can update multiple properties at the same time.
what I was asking was, is it just properties of an object, or can it be arrays?
Yeah, of course, it can be arrays. It can be arrays. So you can do, and again, that goes beyond the scope of the session. Imagine that we have an array of scores, right? That happens when you complete a coding challenge. In your profile, you got first name Patrick, and then scores. You got an array. That's why you are now on the leaderboards, and you can see the evolution, right? Score 8076, date, whatever, right? So when you complete a challenge, we want to add a new element to the array. So in the database, we can do things like that. Yeah. This is about the way we deal with the database, which is, again, beyond the scope of this session. But of course, we can do that. We can say, hey, I want to push a new element to the array of scores that will be that one. We could even, what happened if we notice a mistake. You got a score 0 in the database, but we realize after checking the logs that your score was 76. So we can also do set scores dot index, something like that. Yeah. So we can edit the index 0 of your array of scores. So instead of value 0, it will be 91. Yeah. So the database is very powerful. We can perform many different operations. But again, this is about the details of what do we do when a user requests patch. Last but not least, delete. When we want to delete an element, what's the technical action that we are performing? What? It's just delete. Richard is right. Delete is the same, right? This is very easy. So delete looks something like that. App.delete. Do we have to pass the ID? Of course. Correct. Correct. We delete a specific show, as Patrick said, right? So we here in the URL, we pass the ID of the show. So that will be an example of a basic but pretty decent set of endpoints where we can get the list of endpoints. No, sorry, on top. We can get all the TV shows. We can get an individual TV show for performance reasons. We can create a new TV show. We can replace an existing TV show. We can update a set of properties of an existing TV show. And finally, we can delete a TV show. As I mentioned before, it goes beyond the scope of the session to explain the database details. However, and the last thing of this workshop is, right, so this is the way the backend exposes the list of available endpoints, the API of your system, from the front-end point of view. How do we ask the backend, please delete that TV show, for example? Well, we can do something like that. Let me actually replace that. Imagine that we got a TV show with ID whatever, yeah, random ID, and we want to delete it. We're going to delete it. So what we will do is, first of all, how do we pass that ID to the URL? Template literal, I like that. Yeah? So here we say, hey, rest shows, and then the ID of the show. And how do we specify if we want to get, if we want to edit, if we want to delete? Because at the moment, we're not telling the backend what sort of operation we want to perform.
Second one is just fetch, which has no data.
That's correct. Richard is right. As a second argument of fetch, we can pass the details of fetch. And one of these details is method. Delete. Yeah? Method. Get. Interestingly, if we want to use get, we don't have to pass it explicitly because get is considered the default. But that's okay. You can be a bit more explicit and say, hey, I want to get the details of that TV show. And finally, what if we want to create something like that, right? How do we pass the title of the TV show, the synopsis, the director, the year? We can pass another property, correct, called body, with some details about our TV show. Let's read that bit. A, I want to call the backend, an endpoint called REST shows. Sorry, I said create, that's wrong, obviously. What should be instead of create? Post. Yeah, that was my fault, of course. Create is the human action, but the technical action is post. So I want to create a list of TV shows. Sorry, not create. I want to access the list of TV shows and I want to post, which means I want to create a new one. And these are the details of the TV show that I want to add to my database. I think it's fairly readable, right? Of course, we can pass whatever we want here. That's an object that the backend will capture, and then it will pass the object to the database somehow. Anything else, guys? No? Abdul, do you have any question? I'll take that as a no. So that's it, guys, in regards to the first session to CRUD. Gray will explain a bit further this afternoon. So thank you very much.